All right, let's just dive right into one of the oldest and honestly most mind-bending questions out there. Is consciousness woven into the very fabric of the universe itself? Today we're taking a serious look at an idea called panpsychism.
But before we get to the whole universe, let's start with something a bit closer to home. You. Seriously, just think about this for a second. Why does it feel like something to be you? Why isn't it all just dark inside? Why do you have this inner movie of colors and sounds and feelings and thoughts? That subjective experience, that's the real mystery.
And look, this isn't some new problem we just thought of. Way back in the 19th century, the famous biologist, Thomas Henry Huxley, said that consciousness popping out of brain tissue was like a magical genie appearing from a lamp. Poof, it's just there. And for more than 100 years since, science has really struggled to explain how or even why that poof happens.
And that whole genie in a lamp problem, that feeling of what it's like to be you, well, that brings us to what modern philosophers have dubbed the single biggest challenge in understanding the mind.
It's called the hard problem of consciousness, a term coined by philosopher David Chalmers. And here's the thing, we're actually pretty good at the easy problems, like how the brain processes information, how neurons fire, how you pull your hand away from a hot stove. We can explain what the brain does, but we have basically no idea why all that complex processing should be accompanied by an inner feeling, a subjective experience, at all.
So, if our standard scientific story has trouble explaining how consciousness just magically appears out of matter that isn't conscious, what's the alternative? Well, some thinkers are revisiting a very, very old and pretty radical idea.
And that idea is panpsychism. At its core, it's the view that consciousness didn't just appear in brains. Instead, maybe consciousness, or at least some primitive form of it, is a fundamental and widespread property of the universe. Kind of like mass or electric charge have always been. It's just part of the basic furniture of reality.
And you know, this isn't some fringe theory that just popped up. This idea has a super deep history. You can trace it all the way back to the ancient Greeks through brilliant Enlightenment philosophers like Spinoza and Leibniz. And get this, in the 19th century, it was basically the mainstream view, held by intellectual giants like William James. It only fell out of fashion in the 20th century, but now, because of that hard problem, it's making a serious comeback.
Okay, but before we go any further, we absolutely have to clear up the single biggest misconception about this theory, because it's a big one.
Panpsychism does not mean that your coffee mug is sitting there worrying about its day or that a rock is having complex philosophical thoughts. That idea is called pancognitivism, and pretty much nobody believes it. The modern view is actually something called pan-experientialism. It's the idea that fundamental particles, like an electron, might have an incredibly simple, primitive form of raw experience. Not thinking, not believing, just a tiny flicker of feeling.
So a good way to think about this is that panpsychism offers a kind of third path. It's not dualism, which says mind and matter are two totally different things. And it's not traditional physicalism, which says mind somehow emerges from totally non-conscious matter. Panpsychism is a unified view. It says there's only one kind of stuff, matter, but that stuff has an inner, experiential side right from the very beginning.
So I know, the idea of an electron having a flicker of feeling can sound pretty out there. Why are serious philosophers and even some scientists actually taking this seriously? Well, the main argument is actually pretty powerful.
The argument, which owes a lot to the great philosopher Bertrand Russell, starts with a simple observation about our most fundamental science, physics. All physics really does is describe the behavior of matter.
Think about it. Physics is incredible at telling us what matter does. It gives us these beautiful mathematical equations that describe its structure, its dynamics, how it interacts with all the other bits of matter.
But here's the twist. Physics tells us absolutely nothing about what matter is in and of itself. It describes everything from the outside, the doing, but it's completely silent about the being, the intrinsic nature of matter. It's like we have a perfect blueprint of a building, but no idea what it's actually made of. There's a giant hole right in the center of our picture of reality.
Russell put it perfectly. He said, the reason physics is all math is because that's all we can know from the outside looking in. And so, panpsychists make a radical proposal. Maybe consciousness, the one and only thing each of us knows from the inside, is the missing piece. Maybe consciousness is the intrinsic nature of matter that physics is describing from the outside.
Now, this whole idea finds a really interesting, though controversial, echo in the weird world of quantum mechanics. You've probably heard of Schrödinger's cat, which highlights this thing called the measurement problem, where a particle seems to be in multiple states at once until it's observed. The crucial role of an observer has led some thinkers to wonder if consciousness itself might be playing a role at this fundamental level. Now, that's a huge leap for sure, but it shows how the deepest mysteries of physics and the mind sometimes seem to point in a similar direction.
Of course, panpsychism is far from a perfect theory. In fact, it has one absolutely massive challenge, an issue so difficult that it might just be a deal breaker.
This is called the combination problem. Okay, let's walk through it. Step 1. Let's assume an electron has a tiny speck of experience. Fine. Step 2. My brain, made of trillions upon trillions of those particles, has this single, rich, unified consciousness. Right. So, here's the gap. How in the world do all those countless little micro-experiences combine to create my one big macro-experience? It's not at all clear how you'd add up tiny feelings to get one complex thought. And right now, no one has a good answer.
And that's not the only problem. Critics correctly point out that, at least for now, panpsychism is pretty much untestable. You can't really design an experiment to prove it right or wrong. It doesn't really help us make any new predictions about the world. And let's just be honest, to a lot of people, the whole idea just feels deeply, deeply weird and counterintuitive.
So even though panpsychism faces these huge hurdles, it's still on the table as this really elegant, if radical, potential solution to the hard problem of consciousness. It forces us to ask some really profound questions about the nature of reality itself, and that leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. If it's true, if experience is really a fundamental feature of the universe, what does that change? What does that mean for our place in the cosmos? What does it mean for how we see the world, and maybe more importantly, how we see ourselves?